Ready to go?
Sure.
You ready? All right, folks, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the June 20th meeting of the Zoning Subcommittee and to our semi-annual zoning forum. Welcome to everybody who's here in the audience, and I specifically want to welcome Tom Airgood, who's here again in his capacity as liaison from the ZBA. We've been serving without a ZBA liaison for probably more than a year now, and it's nice to have you back, Tom. So welcome. Okay, so this is a meeting that we do twice a year, our zoning forum, and what I usually do is start off by, actually what I'd like to do is start off by approving our minutes before I get to that. We have two sets of minutes here, so please excuse us for a moment. We have the minutes from March 28th. Prepared by Mr. Carson. Were there any comments or questions about those minutes? Rob?
I move to approve the minutes of March 28th.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? All in favor? That's approved by a 3-0 vote. And the minutes from June 6th, prepared by Mr. Crowner. Comments or discussion?
I move to approve.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? That's a 3-0 vote in favor of approval. Thank you. All right, now that that's out of the way, what I usually do in these sessions is start off by providing an overview of how our zoning process works for folks that aren't familiar with that. And there is a handout on the back table, the one that looks like this, the circle of zoning, that describes an overview of the process. As most of you probably know, here in Amherst, we have town meeting twice a year in the spring and in the fall. And our tradition is that we tend to concentrate our zoning-related activity in the fall town meeting because the spring town meeting is usually occupied with budget issues and other matters. So fall is traditionally the town meeting that contains more zoning. The process of putting together the zoning articles for the fall town meeting and even beyond that really starts now. We just wrapped up our Springtown meeting a few weeks ago, and so we usually have this session to kick off the fall zoning season, even though we're just getting started with summer now. We hold this session here to solicit citizen feedback and input in terms of your ideas and your thoughts and your priorities, so that we can take that feedback that we get from you all and combine that with input from the planning board and form our work list and our priorities for what we will work on over the course of the summer as we move toward fall town meeting. We will spend the summer in meetings of the zoning subcommittee, this body, which meets usually every other Wednesday, first and third Wednesdays of the month at 5 p.m. And we sit here and we work on zoning articles and talk to members of the public about them also, but primarily try to work out the details of the language for those zoning articles. That will happen over the course of the summer. As we get closer to the fall, toward the middle and end of August, we will finalize the list of topics that we plan to bring to town meeting in the fall. And then for each zoning article that will be on the warrant of fall town meeting, the planning board itself, not just this body, but the larger group of which we are a subcommittee, will hold a public hearing on each zoning article, which will be probably in the September-October time frame, more than likely October. Fall town meeting this year starts, I believe, on November 19th. It's a little bit late due to various scheduling issues. It starts on the Monday before Thanksgiving and carries on the following Monday and Wednesday after that if necessary. So it's a couple of weeks later than we traditionally have it. So in any case, whatever articles we have on the warrant for fall town meeting will be considered at that time. And as most of you know, any change to the zoning bylaw requires approval by 2/3 of town meeting in order to be put into effect. So that's sort of a quick view of how the process itself works. We are starting from what we always have early in the process is the document that's also available on the back table that's called Amherst Planning Board Zoning Subcommittee FY13 Zoning Work Plan, which is basically our laundry list of articles that we are currently working on, have recently worked on, are planning on working on, would like to work on, might never work on, various other categories. They're arranged with, in rough order of priority, with no particular sequencing implied within each priority list. But generally speaking, priority A are issues and articles are ones that are on the front burner, and everything below that, priority B and below, are things that we would like to do someday, but that we're not actively working on. So as probably most of you know, most of our effort over the past year or more has been concerned with village center rezoning in North and South Amherst, and that remains an active area of interest for the board. The board had a meeting several weeks ago in which we discussed our priorities and plans for village center rezoning going forward. The board has not yet reached a decision in terms of whether or not it will be pursuing those articles for fall town meeting. That's an open issue, and we welcome your feedback on that as well. The meeting tonight is primarily for the purpose, as I said earlier, of soliciting feedback from you. So, so when we get to the public comment portion of the meeting, which is coming right up, I will ask you to raise your hand to be recognized, and to please approach the front table and use the microphone here at the front of the room. Even if you've got a loud voice, we're being recorded by Amherst Media, and the tape can't pick you up unless you use the microphone in the front of the room. So please come up, use the mic, and identify yourself so that we all know who you are. And I would also just ask folks to bear in mind the context that we're working within here, which is the context of zoning. The town has many issues and problems that it is always confronting, and we cannot solve all of them through zoning, unfortunately. This body's concern is with zoning, and so I just ask people to keep that in mind when you tell us what your grand thoughts and ideas are, but bear in mind that we have limited control over a lot of aspects of what happens in town, and we only work through zoning. Zoning concerns itself entirely with land use, what uses are allowed or not allowed on what areas, and what sorts of conditions and requirements are attached to those uses. So that's what we have purview over, is the zoning. In particular, what we do not do and what we cannot do is advance projects. What we hear a lot are people that want certain things to happen in certain places. We want a farmer's market downtown, or we want a performing arts center somewhere, or we wish we had a market somewhere. This body doesn't create projects, it doesn't promote projects. The planning board, and one of its capacities is to hear permit requests for projects when they come forward, but neither the planning board nor this group, the zoning subcommittee, actively creates or advances or works on projects. So just try to keep that distinction in mind between what zoning does in respect to land use and what we can do in terms of bringing specific uses to specific areas. We can't do that through the work that we do here. So, just quickly going through the work list, since that's the first item on our agenda. Mr. Tucker, thank you for the revisions that you made to this since our last meeting. In the last meeting, we had this organized more from a calendar perspective, and since we haven't yet made any decisions on what the timing is going to be, we've got it now organized into high-level sections within Priority A, ongoing zoning issues and new zoning issues. So under ongoing zoning issues, we have the Village Center rezoning projects that I already mentioned in North Amherst and South Amherst. Permit findings, criteria, and performance standards, which is another area that we've worked on over the last couple of years and continues to be an area of interest. Residential use amendments, single-family, duplex, converted dwelling, lodging, boarding house, and flood-prone conservancy remapping and rezoning. We've done some work over the last year to to convert our official zoning map from the paper maps that we've been using for more than 40 years to digital maps in the town's GIS system. And we need to continue working on that to better map out and delineate our flood-prone conservancy zoning district. Under new zoning issues, there's a bunch of items there. I won't go through them in detail, but I will highlight the fact that transfer of development rights is an area that we have talked a lot about with this group and with the planning board, and we've heard a lot of feedback and requests from people to consider that. Transfer of development rights basically would involve creating a system where people can transfer the right to develop on properties from one area to another. So typically you have a sending zone and a receiving zone, and people who own property and have development rights within the sending zone would be able to transfer, in other words, give up some or all of those development rights in the sending zone in exchange for receiving enhanced development rights in the receiving zones. We don't have anything like that currently in Amherst, but lots of other communities do things like that to try to protect their outlying areas. And that's one of the issues that we hear quite frequently that people would like us to explore. So that's sort of at the top of our list of new zoning issues that we need to do a lot of legwork in terms of putting together a system for how that would work in Amherst, or think about whether it would work and how it would work and whether we want to do it. So that's definitely an area of active consideration that we have not yet started working on, but over the course of the summer, we've already got a couple meetings planned to start talking about that and thinking about it in more detail. Mr. Tucker, did you have anything new or specific that you wanted to discuss on the list?
The DEP Zone 1 compliance amendments. The Department of Environmental Protection licenses communities' public water supplies. And the Zone 1 in this case is an area around our surface water reservoirs, specifically Atkins Reservoir in the northeast corner of the town and partially in other communities. The Board of Health is going to be amending its regulations so that the town has regulations that comply more directly with what the state's regulations are for the kinds of things that can occur in that Zone 1, and there may be an opportunity, hopefully in a very simple way, for the zoning to reinforce that, perhaps simply by referencing the state regulations rather than going into the details of which uses are allowed or not allowed and so forth. But that is part of our ongoing response to the state trying to ensure the safety of Amherst public water supplies.
Thank you. Any comments or questions before we turn to public comment? All right, seeing none, we shall turn to public comment then. For the folks that came in late, I will remind you that you do need to come up and use the mic at the front of the room so that everyone can hear you, and please identify yourself at the mic when you're recognized. We do have a pretty good crowd here tonight. I will make sure that everybody who wants to speak gets a chance to, but I'll ask that you keep your comments relatively short. We don't have a clock and I'm not gonna cut people off, but please try to respect the fact that there are a lot of people here who want to talk, and I do want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. So with that, yes, ma'am, in the front row. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
My name is Elisa Rubenstein. I live at 38 Fearing Street in Amherst. I'm also a town meeting member from Precinct 10. For the past 2 years at the annual zoning forum, which I've attended, the first items on the priority A list have remained the same: village center and form-based zoning. We have revisited these items again and again to the same effect. Instead, I urge the planning board to change direction this year, to move some items at the bottom of the priority A list to the top, and also bring forward some priority B items to address a situation that many of us year-long residents see as urgent. The urgent situation that residents in RG are facing is the purchase of homes by LLCs and absentee landlords as investment properties. What has created an increasing number of such transactions is the current economic climate and the zoning bylaw passed in town meeting that allows for conversion by right of a single family to a two-family residence in RG. It is my understanding that the intent behind this bylaw change was to allow more homeowners in neighborhoods abutting the town center the option of creating a second unit to help them afford to stay in their homes. The second unit would attract more families and promote infill in already dense neighborhoods. However, this scenario has not been realized. Instead, two-family becomes up to 8 unrelated students in a boarding room-style house with no owner occupancy. Most often the result has been poorly maintained houses, an increase in noise complaints and nuisance houses, and a property with 4 to 8 cars where previously there were 1 or 2. Later speakers this evening will show data to illustrate the impact of these realities. How can we address the negative consequences of these conversions? Some items on your work plan could be helpful. Nuisance property amendments, residential rental registration, and other residential regulations I see on the bottom half of the priority A list. Functional family definition. All these look very promising, and I would support them. Revisiting the by right conversions in view of what is currently happening is also key to dealing with unintended consequences I have described. If the planning board were to make these issues a top priority in the coming year, we could be on the way to turning around a negative situation that has taxed our town resources. So I would just urge that maybe a break is needed at this point, at least during this summer, where I think things are moving very fast. More and more houses are going on the market. So I feel that this is the time to change our focus, and I hope you will be amenable to that. And the residents in RG would certainly be happy to work with you in a collaborative way.
Thank you, Ms. Rubenstein. I'll remind folks that one of the zoning articles that we brought to town meeting last year was in fact an attempt to change the duplex requirements in RG to only allow duplexes by right if they were in fact owner occupied, which is basically one of the items that you mentioned. And that's one of the items on our list, and we would very much like to bring that forward. So I very much appreciate your comments, and that's something that we're actively working on and would hope to advance in the fall. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Adams.
Lisa brought some copies, because it's longer than I'm going to have time for, so have some homework.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
If people are passing things out, feel free to just leave them down at the end of the table and we can circulate them amongst ourselves. We've got a bunch of wires in the front here, and I don't want anything unfortunate to happen in the course of handing out paperwork.
Thank you. My name is Maurianne Adams. I'm at 14 Beston Street. I'm a town meeting representative from Precinct 10. Going through your work list, which is quite daunting, and I was trying to group things in terms of what might make sense kind of logically and sequentially. And so let me group them by saying that I strongly urge the postponement of further discussion of village center form-based zoning, or of gateway and town center, or of transfer of development rights until first we get that market and housing study so that we have some data that can help shape our more than vision, I hope, but rather likelihood or probability of of what this infill and development might look like. It's been a great pity that that has been delayed, and I continue to say that it would be very difficult for me, at least, to support these ideas without market and housing data to support them. So that then speaks to a number of things that I think are fairly high priorities on the priority A list. Instead, what I urge that we spend time on are the items that are linked as possible general bylaws that Mr. O'Keefe, you just commented on, and that Mrs. Rubenstein also kind of spoke about. Residential use amendments having to do with single-family, duplex, converted, lodging, boarding house, the whole gamut of rental properties has become an enormous priority for the RG neighborhood, as I know you know. And we're eager this summer and in the fall to work closely with your subcommittee and with the planning board to figure out a bylaw that removes the by right conversion of single family to duplex in a form that will pass. So, I think we're eager to support you on that. We also want to urge collaboration on an owner occupancy as the norm in RG and not as the as an exception. I went down into your later lists to think about the rental registration and strict enforceable permit requirements, which I think we really do need for all rental properties, and particularly those that do not have owner occupancy. We've spoken a lot in the past about students. I really want to shift the discussion. For me, the discussion is not an issue of student behavior. It's really the expectation that we need to have as a town that owners and managers be held accountable for violations of noise, nuisance, health, and safety complaints, as well as rental overcrowding. And so I have a bit of a bumper sticker for that, and it's this. It's good business to be good neighbors. And that's something I'd really like to urge to managers and to owners. So that when we get down to this issue of how we can go about this, I think I raised with you, Mr. O'Keefe, that the possibility of should we be looking at citizen initiatives, bylaws? Is it something that the zoning subcommittee wants to take up? In other words, not just the issue of conversions, not just the issue of owner occupancy, not just the technicality by which a single house is 4 unrelated and a duplex is 8 plus unrelated, but also this larger issue of something that is more than a voluntary rental registration, but that is a permit requirement that requires inspection and follow-up inspection, and that takes the onus for enforcement away from the neighbors and gives it rather to the owners and to the managers who are profiting from the rental situation. So I want to say in concluding that, at least for myself, the solution to this increasingly serious rental situation, where more and more houses in our neighborhood are becoming attractive to LLCs for precisely the point of non-owner occupant rental situations with more than 8 students in them, we know that settling that becomes a precondition and a test, I believe, for our ability in Amherst to manage the quality of life for year-round residents as well as for those who rent. My own confidence in an infill and development plan for RGs and village centers, such as we've had in the master plan, will depend entirely on whether we show the will and capacity to manage the burgeoning number of rental houses that we already have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Mr. Tucker, I think this would be a good time to just quickly review some of the efforts that are underway in Town Hall specifically in the area of rental registration and in inspections, because many of the issues that Ms. Adams just raised, I think, are actively being pursued by other portions of town government beyond just the zoning focused areas that we're looking at. And so I think it would be helpful if people had a good overall sense of the various fronts on which those issues are being addressed.
Thank you. The initiative, Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative, which is the rubric under which the town manager is pushing forward staff efforts to try and address these questions has been underway for more than a year, ever since we started having this conversation and ever since we've noticed the increasing conversion that you are describing. That's been underway for some time. There have been periods of time when you were getting more than a conversion a month in Amherst, and that's an alarming rate. We are well aware of this. Part of what we have done is to increase our enforcement capacity. We have the code enforcement agent now who focuses solely on this question, John Thompson, and is out there beginning to make his presence felt among the property owners, the landlords, and the property managers. We have a new building commissioner who is focused on this as well, and who is with other staff helping to reorganize the way in which we approach this, so that, and we had already been trying to increase the coordination between the various enforcement arms of the town, whether that was inspections, the health department, fire inspectors, police personnel responding to a problem who noticed something in a rental unit. That is all underway, and you should watch and see what happens. I would also encourage you, if you know of problems, to let us know. We do not yet, and we will not probably for a year or more, have in place a system whereby we can monitor every rental property in Amherst. So for some time to come, we will still depend to an extent on complaints and the vigilance of neighbors. So we don't want to put that on you, but that is part of the way, the reality that's there now. And until we have a workable system of rental registration where we know where all of the properties are, we will need that assistance. You noted the general bylaws amendments that are under development. Some of those, again, we are doing this in an incremental way. We are trying to address sort of the low-hanging fruit. First, parking problems, which are the most visible issues. We dealt with that in part at the town meeting just passed. In the fall, we hope to bring forward a general bylaw which is not subject to grandfathering, which would, as of the moment of its adoption, be enforceable on any property in Amherst. We're also looking at the potential for what's called a nuisance property amendment. This would actually codify existing capacity. The health department, in responding to properties that have upholstered couches out on the lawn, haven't mowed the lawn and the area around the house for months and months, and it's up 2-3 feet in the air, and so forth. Those kinds of problems actually also represent health and safety problems and can be addressed. What we're trying to do is put together a bylaw that codifies that and coordinates it with the efforts of the other enforcement agencies so that it's right there in the general bylaws to use. We can do that now, but it's not as easily done in a coordinated fashion without a bylaw. And again, the intent, the thing we're aiming at, is a rental registration system where we know 95, 98% of the rental properties in Amherst, and we have a system for bringing them in as they are created. And over time, and this will take some time because it requires resources, and even with additional personnel, we have some limits on that, requires the pre-inspection of rental units and some periodic regular inspections. Re-inspections of those units. One of the notions has been to create a kind of system whereby the town says, we've inspected this rental unit, and this rental unit meets all of our qualifications, gets a little gold star or something, such that parents or people moving into town know this property, as opposed to those over there which don't have the gold star, has been inspected. The town says this one is okay. And as a way of encouraging landlords and property managers to become part of the system as well. We will always have on the margins people who own properties who go on sabbatical and want to let a friend or somebody live there, or rent it briefly to create income in the interim, and we will need to figure out a way that is less onerous than treating them like the owners of Puffton, but still has enough tangibility that we can control what happens there in terms of the surroundings. So that's for a generalized description of what's going on. It is an incremental process. It will probably take more than a year to get most of the major parts in place and operating in a reasonable way, but I hope you'll be able to, I hope in fact you're already, some of you, seeing some of the differences because of the presence of our code enforcement agent and better coordinated enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Ms. Brestrup.
I just wanted to note for your information that the code enforcement officer has only been full-time for about a week. Prior to that, he was only working 2 days a week. So the effect of his being there should start showing up more now that he's there full-time.
Thank you to both of you. You know, it's a very broad range of issues that are associated with housing, with rentals, student behavior, things like that. And so I just wanted to help people understand the broad range of activities that the town is undertaking to address those issues, not just through the work that we're doing here on zoning, but in lots of other areas too. So, you know, the zoning tends to get a lot of press and a lot of heat, but there's a lot of other things happening that are important too. So, you know, stay tuned to all the other developments out there. Yes, sir, in the back. Sure.
Hi, my name is Rolf Karlstrom, 73 Fearing Street, Precinct 10. Appreciate the open forum and the chance to give some input on the big issues, as you say, that are coming up, and complex issues. My understanding is this is to look at the priorities for the next year for the board, for the zoning board subcommittee. That's correct, right? So what I've passed out is some data that I've collected, and I'd just like to show you. My main point today is going to be to urge the planning board to think very hard about the issue of owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied rentals. Simply put, one of those models works wonderfully to create a system or a neighborhood where student rentals and neighbors can coexist. The other has been consistently for decades a non-workable solution, and it's becoming much, much worse, as we heard earlier on, with the conversions of single families into two families and the definition of a family as four unrelated adults. We have a very quickly spreading, and I would say urgent problem. As Mr. Tucker said, it's happening at a remarkable, alarming rate. And I really think this next year is a time to focus very clearly on this issue of how student rentals and year-round neighbors can work together, live together and work together. I should also say I work at UMass. I'm chair of a department at UMass. I have a very strong connection to the students. I'm really advocating for a system that can accommodate both student rentals and year-round neighbors in the RG neighborhood. So what I've handed out is I asked the police department for their call records for several houses in my area. And what I tried to do was find duplexy kind of sized houses. And the ones that are highlighted on top, I went to the property cards, and those are all non-owner occupied rentals in my immediate vicinity. And the ones that are not highlighted at the bottom are owner occupied rentals. So two types of rentals in our neighborhood. And I've summed in a little Excel spreadsheet and sorted by numbers of nuisance, noise, violation type calls. I think it's one of those columns from high to low. And you'll just see the remarkable complete overlap of nuisance houses with absentee landlords in my neighborhood. So the data are very strong. It goes back a long time that this particular model does not have the incentives built in, does not have the enforcement built in to make it work for us as neighbors. And because of the economics at the moment, low interest rates, the proximity to campus, you can charge very high rents in our neighborhood, and two town actions over the last 2 years, we're seeing a snowballing effect. One of those actions was the by right conversion that's been mentioned to two family. The other is the lack of any owner-occupied stipulation that used to be, and is often part of special permits, is now going by the wayside in many cases. So what I would like to point out is that we can do this correctly. We can coexist, but we need the planning board to think very carefully about how to make absentee landlords accountable for the problems they create. And I think it's completely well documented, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, that they are the source of the problems that we experience. Not the students so much, the landlords. They make money, as I would say, at my expense as a neighbor. The quality of my life goes down. There are some ways we can do that. So I have 3 basic suggestions, and these have been mentioned, but I think they're very important. Work to reinstate that owner occupancy as a norm or an expectation for conversions to 2 families. In cases where that's not the case, this permitting system that we're talking about needs to have teeth. It has to have regular inspections. I would say it needs to have neighbor input on whether a permit is renewed. And I would say it needs to be a very easy online system to register complaints. That could be something that we could do maybe over the next years, create a web-based nuisance house input for residents. As has been mentioned, the planning board, kudos for bringing this, this article to town meeting about owner occupancy, and I hope we can bring that back with some of this data. I'm willing, what I want to say is I'm willing to help collect these data, present these data as a citizen to help the planning board with a revised article in town meeting. We really need to revisit the by right conversion to single-family homes to duplexes and the definition of families. Those are on your list already, I think, and those need to be at the very top of the priority list. And then the third thing I would say is to carefully assess the findings of the market studies that are coming with regard to neighborhood impacts, and include neighborhood input on that before new zoning bylaws are brought forth. So I would say that the priorities now, as has been said, are to focus on fixing what is a snowballing problem and may leave us with no year-round neighbors in the vicinity in not too distant future if we don't do something now. If there's any questions about these data, I actually have the actual scanned police records for each of those houses. I had to do a little bit of parsing. There's, of course, calls to the police that are legitimate for any homeowner, citizen assistance and burglaries and that kind of thing. So I separated out the numbers you see are nuisance calls, alcohol violations, noise and whatnot, versus in each house, versus what I would call more normal type interactions. So I think the data are clear, and I hope that the zoning board can help prioritize that and make it something we really attack this year.
Thank you very much. Ms. Keller.
Thank you.
Janet Keller, Precinct 1, town meeting member. So I want to say that the problems that have been discussed thus far are increasingly of concern in our neighborhood as well. And I'd like to ask, well, let me start out by saying that our neighborhood of North Amherst, the folks I've been working with, are for development, and we want it to contribute to strong neighborhoods and strong village centers and a strong downtown where people really want to be. And that toward that end, we've been working with one of the landowners to discuss possibilities, and we look forward to more positive conversations along those lines. We want to be able to support future zoning articles. We really want to do that. And in order to do that, we need from you to make sure that we have the key information beforehand, such as the housing, transportation, flood map studies, build out, and fiscal impact analyses that would inform zoning articles. We need to be confident and clear that any zoning articles you propose for North Amherst respect and enhance the rural character that is present in 60% of the area, the 220-acre area that was mapped for the charrettes, and direct the growth to the most built-up and least sensitive areas and away from the floodplains, the wetlands, the farms, the historic properties, and natural resource habitat. Toward that end, and would need adequate buffers and maintain the neighborhood zoning on Montague Road as well. Toward that end, and bearing in mind that concerns about the kinds of rental issues that have been discussed by previous speakers this evening, I request that the zoning subcommittee switch the priority of items on its list to give much higher priority to those that would support these objectives, and therefore changing the site plan review conversion of single family to duplexes back to special permit, addressing the owner-occupied definition problems that people have cited, addressing the combined impact of the 4 unrelated and the duplex provisions, and remap and rezone the flood-prone areas. I also request that you expedite, as much as within your power, the studies mentioned and structure the zoning priority list to ensure that information is available to provide evidence in support of any rezoning so that we can give it our wholehearted support. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Hello, good afternoon. Carol Gray, 815 Southeast Street. So I'd like to echo what a couple people have said. One is that I would assume that there won't be any discussion about how to recraft zoning provisions until the data has come back from studies. We have pending hundreds of thousands of dollars in studies, not just the market study, but also the North Amherst study that was just funded. There was a comprehensive rezoning study that was funded even before the market study that's been out for a couple of years, the recent Gateway study. And if we're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on studies, we should make sure we get all that data before we contemplate rezoning. So I'd also like to echo what I saw in one of the handouts here from John Fox, which is that I think it would be very helpful for town meeting to have all the pros and cons of any zoning article presented. The memos that come, I would assume they're crafted from the planning department, but maybe it's crafted by the planning board. They tend to be advocacy pieces and rarely cite any of the downsides of a particular rezoning initiative. But it's in the interest of our community for the centuries to come, for the lawmakers, which is what town meeting is, to hear all the pros and cons. And so for staff, it's my understanding of what the staff's role should be is to advise of the pros and cons. And I think that's really been lacking. And I would like to see there be a deliberate change in policy with the planning board requiring that from town staff, that future memos to town meeting will have the pros and the cons. Talking about the form-based zoning, I'd like to lay out 3 things that I think need to be changed. One is alternative compliance. I was trying to look online to see if other communities had alternative compliance. Alternative compliance, for those of you who aren't aware of it, allows basically everything in that 100-page zoning package to be waived by the planning board. And I think this really shifts the power of lawmaking from town meeting to an appointed board, because it means that basically the laws, there are some criteria for exercising this alternative compliance, but they're very minimal, and creatively, you could make just about anything fit into those criteria. So eliminate alternative compliance altogether if you want to have a strong law. Another thing is eliminate site plan review for anything that might be controversial. Banks, restaurants. If we want to avoid having the little Bank of America that popped up down the road here in Atkins Corner or in any other village center, we need to have it not be a by right option. You must have it be something with a special permit. And this would be very easy to do. It's just changing those letters for anything that's controversial. And to determine what's controversial, I would say imagine the worst possible example of anything that fits that category. And if you wouldn't want that in that zone, then it should be special permit and not site plan review. And that's how you'll avoid those little Bank of Americas. Another thing is, so what is sustainability, and is form-based zoning the only way to get it? Personally, I don't really like the aesthetic of form-based zoning in many contexts. I think it makes sense for the downtown to have buildings right up at the street. But the rest of the areas, I think it's nice to have interspersed grassy areas and having buildings right up at the street, or like, for example, Cushman Market, to be able to pull right in the front rather than driving around to the back to park. I think it's nice to pull in up front, and I don't know why it's more sustainable to require the aesthetic of form-based zoning. I don't see that as a necessity of sustainability. Smart growth certainly says concentrating density in the village centers, but there's many ways to get to smart growth. And when I researched form-based zoning, and I've looked online a lot, the examples that I see are all urban, and the pictures that you see are all cities. And I think we lose sight of what is most charming and beloved about our community if we try to make us be a city. What people love is that we have all the resources of a city, but it feels like a town. The more you make it look urban, the more you lose that feeling. Okay. Another thing is, I would like us to just back up and see, what does the public want for priorities? I went to those master plan meetings, and other than town staff saying form-based zoning, I didn't hear people talking about form-based zoning in those breakout groups when the public was coming. And what I thought is very probative of what the public wants is the random survey, which I'm sure you have, but here's for people in the public who don't have it. And the random survey, which was more than 600 households polled randomly. And so in this way, you control bias. There aren't people with interest groups weighing in. And what the random survey said was that the most desirable ratings were for, number one, protection of environmental quality, air, water quality. I don't see anything on the single-spaced front and back pages that are protecting water and air quality. The next one is protection of the natural environment, forests, wildlife, fish, habitat. Almost nothing, maybe nothing on the two-page priority list that address those things. And the next one is university research, clean, high technology, economic development. There's certainly a lot about economic development. I didn't see as much about the clean energy, but anyway. The next one is historic resources are part of the distinctive character of Amherst. And the next one is agricultural based businesses and services. Now, I did notice on the priority list, there are a number of things that are to help farmers. I would boost those to the top. We know that the public wants those things. They should take the things that are universally agreed to, or almost universally agreed to, make those the top priorities. If partly because town meeting has been through the ringer on the form-based zoning, we need to have some consensus building on things that are universal goods, and certainly protecting the environment is that. There's also the floodplain maps just came out. I would research what are other communities doing to protect wetlands and floodplains. I've been concerned that I read something from one member of town staff that implied that some of the zoning pertaining to floodplains was maybe a little more flexible, or we might see how it fits around existing development plans. The floodplains should be what they are, just like the wetlands have specific delineations. It's not only in the interest to protect the environment, to protect floodplains and habitats in those areas, but also with climate change, there's going to be higher water levels worldwide in the next 50 to 100 years. So if we don't protect those strict floodplain boundaries, we're just asking for trouble with whatever development were to go in that area. And if we're looking at the issue of, for example, students, all right, there's many ways to deal with large number of students. One might be to create a bikeable town. And what a lot of communities are doing is prioritizing using Community Preservation Act funds to buy easements to make bike paths. And then if the whole community were bikeable, students could live in South Amherst and bike to UMass. And students would be spread out instead of concentrated all in one area. You could collaborate with the planning boards in neighboring towns so that Sunderland and you are working together to make a bikeable community between borders of towns. And these would be great things that the planning department and the planning staff could invest energy on that would help the climate, help the peak oil problems with gas shortages, what they will be in the future, and it would help our community. Other towns are doing it. Northampton, a lot of towns are using CPA funds to create. Once you buy the easement with CPA funds, then you can build the bike path with CPA funds. We should have somebody in the planning office looking at the entire town, figuring out how you buy easements so that it's faster to cut through the forests in South Amherst to get to town than to go on the roads. Another thing is complete streets. I went to a panel from 350.org on global warming, and they say that one way to have your community be more sustainable is to have requirements about complete streets. In other words, sidewalks and bike paths. When I was on the Joint Capital Planning Committee a couple of years ago, I was surprised to hear that the $2 million project for creating new roads, when I raised my hand, I said, are these going to include bike paths and sidewalks? And I was told no. I was told no, it's going to take too much time to do that, but we're going to save room on the road for those. And I said, but maybe the community would prefer to have one or two fewer roads and instead have bike paths and sidewalks on these roads. Why don't you create a bylaw that requires that, so that we wouldn't have to have citizens, raising their hands saying, please do this, have it be required. Also, if you're trying to encourage, I'd like to see, we're spending hundreds of thousands on studies about how to have more development, but maybe fixing some of the bad development is where we could invest some money. What if you had landscaping done in North Amherst? What if places that were brownfield sites, like old gas stations, what if there were incentives for brownfield sites? And I see that those are on the priority list, but they're about 50 items down is about brownfields. Put all those things up to the top. Spend some money on beautiful landscaping, could fix some of these awful looking village center areas, but the rezoning that you're proposing won't fix them at all. It doesn't touch existing things that look a mess. So in closing, I just would like to see the planning board seize their role in crafting priorities. I feel like they're coming a lot from planning staff, and they're ignoring the random survey, which is the truly objective measure of what the community wants. And I hope you'll look more at this survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. I'd like to take exception to one of the specific points that you made. You said that nothing that we're doing does anything about preserving air and water quality, preserving open space. And I'd just like to cite as a specific exception to that transfer development rights, which I've already mentioned tonight and several other people have mentioned as well. The whole purpose of having a mechanism for transferring development rights is, or half the purpose, is so that those development rights are transferred from the outlying areas and no longer exist there. The reason that you do that is to protect open space and protect your outlying areas. That's the reason for having a mechanism like that. That's the reason that we would like to have that in Amherst. So I don't want people to walk away with the impression that nothing that we're doing is supporting the goals in the master plan that do explicitly speak to the preservation of open space. So that is very much an issue of importance for us, and we are working toward that.
It was air and water quality.
Thank you. You mentioned both of those, actually.
Same thing.
Mr. O'Connor. No, sorry, Mr. O'Connor, and then I'll come back to you, Ms. Burgess. Pull it down too much, it tends to fall over. You gotta keep it up.
So Vince O'Connor, Precinct 1, town meeting member. live on Summer Street. Just a couple of specifics based on some issues that were discussed earlier. One is that in terms of bike paths, bike lanes on roads, I thought, again, I want to say that I think that the form-based zoning road standards are just not necessary. Anyone who has a question about that should go to Meadow Street, which was redone by the Public Works Department through the Select Board and the Public Works Committee. Sidewalks on both sides, bike lanes on both sides. It just, not every activity of the town needs to be addressed by the planning board. And I think, but I do have a specific concern. The board articulated repeatedly its desire to have North Amherst be bikeable. And it was myself who asked the question at town meeting about Sunderland Road and whether bike lanes would extend at least all the way to Coles Road. And it was indicated by the Superintendent of Public Works that the present plans don't include that proposal. Now, we all know, because we've been dealing with Coles Road for years, at least a few years in terms of rezoning, that something's going to be built there sometime in the near future, and on Sunderland Road opposite Coles Road, property owned by W.D. Coles that used to have, most part of it had the sawmill. So it makes sense. Route 63 already has more than adequate bicycling lanes. It's a state highway, but it has good bicycle lanes. One of the things the planning board can and should do is to take the rhetoric that you address to the public in town meeting and direct it to the superintendent of public works and so forth, and make sure that the bike lanes on Sunderland Road extend at least to Coles Road. It'd be very difficult logistically to extend them beyond Coles Road all the way to 116. But at least the areas that are going to be most heavily used should, instead of stopping the bike lanes at the Coles Lumber and the Coles Building Supply building and the new Survival Center. So if that's one practical thing you can do. The other practical thing that I would suggest is that it's not necessarily just zoning that will preserve and protect the water supply at Atkins Reservoir. I personally think that the water fund should be considered and recommended for use by the planning board, because sometimes you can't actually affect what you want to achieve by zoning. You stated that yourself. At some point, I think it would make sense to approach property owners even of existing homes near Atkins Reservoir where there is no sewer system, but just a septic system, right across the street, in fact, from the Atkins Reservoir. And I just would urge the planning board to say one of the ways to well use the water fund is to consider purchasing land that has yet to be built on in that Zone 1 area near the Atkins Reservoir, and to some crucial houses that are whose septic systems are, I think, a little too close to the reservoir, should be considered for purchase. With respect to the issues that you have on your list, I would urge you not to bring back the North Amherst zoning. I think anything, and certainly this form-based zoning, the big problem about the form-based zoning articulation was that it included in the package zoning changes to the underlying zoning that up-zoned for density of residential housing. And I think those two things need to be separated. And I'm not personally adverse to or afraid of. I don't believe that the commercial zone is a boogeyman or a boogie zone in terms of North Amherst. Ms. Keller wrote a very persuasive piece that she delivered to the planning board, pointing out that many of the uses that were claimed by the planning board to be potentially obnoxious already existed in North Amherst, and that the people who own the land that could be used for that purpose, I think, have better thoughts in mind for their property. They're not just going to do something to spite the neighbors. They're going to do something that provides them the best return for their investment. So I don't have any fear of the commercial zone. I wish that you would remove that kind of articulation from ways in which you try to persuade us to do something other than leave the commercial zone as it is. But with regards to Atkins Corner, I would just encourage you to consider, if you want to pilot something, take out Applewood, take out everything east of 116, and rezone the L-shaped parcel that now has townway access that's owned by Hampshire College, and bring back a rezoning proposal with form-based zoning, limited, that doesn't affect anything but that parcel, and see what happens. Use it as a laboratory and see if what you hope to accomplish can be accomplished there. Because there, where it's isolated from single-family neighborhoods and so forth, and the incentive would really be to do commercial activity, you might actually accomplish something. Finally, I guess a couple of other issues. The FPC zone rezoning, I just point out that about a decade ago, the new FPC maps came out. The Fort River maps were brought to town meeting and acted on by town meeting. The maps which exist of the Mill River and Eastman Brook were never brought to town meeting, and I'm sure that one of the reasons is the threat articulated in the June 20th letter by the proprietor of W.D. Coles, that any downzoning, which, FPC zones are FPC zones. They're not going to be able to be built on because they are flood-prone areas. And I think that the town has received, and acted improvidently to such threats earlier. The person who did a lot of the subdividing of Amherst Woods threatened to redraw his subdivisions and add more house lots if the town required him to put in dry sewers when he built the roads, and at least put stubs into people's property so that they could connect later if the sewer were activated. As a result of that planning board caving in to that threat, we now are forced into a situation where existing homes have to be, and existing yards are going to be very expensively redone. And we are engaged in a multi-million-dollar project to sewer Amherst Woods. It's terribly unwise. You should act in the best interests of the town and its environment, and not act under duress or threat by economic actors, especially those who have such a demonstrated self-interest, and an interest that's contrary to the town's interest. So finally, I would encourage everyone whose attention was directed to the most desirable things from the random survey of the master plan, to direct their attention to the areas that have the most unacceptable ratings. And just to briefly articulate them, the most unacceptable were more luxury homes and more large single-family houses on large lots. The second level of unacceptable was more privately owned student housing, more rental apartments, more apartments added to existing homes, more new multi-generational, two more things that have to do with public financing of things. So I just and that unfortunately is the core component of the North Amherst zoning. Those three, and more privately owned rental student housing. And as much as I support affordable housing, this housing is not going to be affordable. It is, and it involves sprawl. Moving students from the campus of the University of Massachusetts 1.25 miles north to privately owned land is not smart growth. It is sprawl, and we need to have a town policy of saying to the university, if you want to have more students, then you find a way to house them on your land.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Ms. Burgess.
Joan, thank you.
My name is Joan Burgess, 36 Mount Pleasant. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 9. Many of my comments are redundant with what you've already heard, although I think I have a different slant on them. Basically, at town meeting, several members expressed concern that we didn't have enough data in order to make a decision on very important zoning issues, and so I think that's a very important message. What I wanted to mention is that we have approved funds to get a lot of the studies done that we think we need in order to get the data, but we already have done one study which I think serves as a good example, and that is the Gateway Visioning Project. We had a very successful final report on that in about a year ago, and I think it was very well done, and the action steps that were offered, I think, could stand to be a protocol for future projects that we use. And in particular, they asked for three additional studies after the visioning, one being the residential market analysis. That is funded, but we don't have the results of it yet. And the intent was that once we had a market analysis, we could move forward with a plan for the kind of housing that might need to be built in an area. And then after that, we need to have a cost-benefit analysis of the plan. Does it do what we think it's going to do? Will it provide the kind of money that we think it's going to provide in revenue? And what are the downsides of it? How much is it going to cost? Another important study that they have in their action plan was the vehicular and pedestrian traffic impact. This, I guess, the university is doing some of, but it certainly hasn't been done for all of our zoning, and now we did ask to have this done in the North Amherst for the area. So I think it's kind of important that this was an action plan that was presented to us, and I think that we should use this and consider it for other projects, not just the Gateway. One of the other things that the Gateway report said is that the town should strengthen and stabilize adjacent neighborhoods. And it went on to say that this can be done now with a lot of the laws and bylaws and inspections that we have in place. And I think that that's a very, very critical piece, and several people have spoken to that already. So, in short, I think that the fiscal year 2013 zoning work plan should be reprioritized to reflect the completion of many studies, allowing time for people at town meeting to make decisions. So I really think that the major zoning amendment should be tabled until such time as we have the results of all of these studies. And then the last thing I think is that we should move up the housing-related bylaw changes so that we can work on things that we have control over right now, and that would be the strengthening and stabilizing of our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burgess. Mr. Fox. Just take them. Thank you. All right.
John Fox, Precinct 10. I'm also a member of town meeting. I live on Faring Street. I'd like to begin just by two quick questions. One of Mr. Tucker. We're all very pleased that there is this inspector. Can you tell us anything about his agenda? That is, do you have timelines for where he's going to inspect, when he should complete inspection in different areas? I mean, what's the program? Can you give us a sense of what we could know in the next 3 months, 6 months, year?
Not out that far, but I can say that his preliminary responsibilities are basically twofold. One is to try and compile, to the extent that we have it, a full list of rental properties in Amherst, including properties that are not on the rental registration system, but which are identified through the assessor's records and other sources, so that we have as complete a data set as we can have on that. The other is to start focusing on properties that have been problems in the past and that represent problem properties, essentially, as well as the higher priority properties that come in as complaints. He's also in the process, as Ms. Brestrup said, he's been on the job for some weeks on a part-time basis, but he is also making himself familiar at this point with all of the nooks and crannies of Amherst's housing system. So I expect that will go on for a couple of months while he is pursuing the other two
And will there be some public record of his progress in any way? I mean, how do we feel sort of comfortable that we are getting the kinds of inspection that I'm sure all of us want? Will there be any kind of,
I don't know if
where
we're
can we
gonna
go on the,
I don't think we're going to have any ride-alongs, if that's what.
not ride-alongs, but any assessment of what has been accomplished? I don't think we need to ride along. No.
I think what we will have is the record of actions that he has taken.
Okay, that's
enforcement actions.
Yes.
I
That would be
don't know
useful.
that there is a plan right now to, compile those and keep those in in some form that is a public document, but they are public actions, and they're available to anyone who wants to know what they are.
Good. Well, I have a statement to read, and I had just one question preliminary to that. It says in Priority A, and I'm very much in favor of the change of priorities that people have been talking about, but it says under Priority A, the first one is Village Center form-based zoning. And I'm wondering, are you suggesting then that if that were brought forward, that it would only be form-based zoning, that it would not contain any of the other changes that were presented in Articles 24 and 25, which were not form-based, but which were dealing with density and other changes? Because this title suggests that it's just about form-based zoning.
I would say that's an incorrect characterization. I would say that whatever form it takes, is yet to be determined. It's just a concept at this point, and so what it would include would be open to discussion. So I would not assume that it would be just form-based, based on just the words that are on this paper. It's just a summary title. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list of everything that's on.
Well, I mentioned that because I think leading into town meeting, a lot of people thought this was just about form-based zoning, because a lot of the materials referred to form-based zoning, then went on to discuss other things. So I would just encourage you in the future, when you have these titles, that it could say Village Center form-based zoning and other rezoning or something, just so that the suggestion here is that it's just about form-based zoning.
Sure. So thank you. We'll take that into
I'm sure it's an easy
consideration.
thing.
The way that this issue has played out over the past year or more, people have come to use form-based code, form-based zoning, as a sort of shorthand reference to the process. But I think that there was a pretty clear understanding among the people that were participating in the discussions about it that it was not confined just to form-based zoning. It was, I myself am using the term village center rezoning
Okay,
projects.
that would be clear.
Which
I
is
think,
a
yes.
more accurate characterization of it. But in either case, no, the title there is
Okay,
not meant to
good.
be prescriptive.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is give a statement about the presentation in the future, which I hope is not at the fall meeting, of some major rezoning article. I would like to propose a new top priority for the next town meeting, that the planning board, or whenever this comes forward, that the planning board adopt a somewhat different standard than currently used in providing material to town meeting members regarding a proposed major rezoning article. I am guided here by the emphasis of the League of Women Voters on having town meeting members well informed before voting on an issue. That should mean that town meeting members are provided sufficient information to understand both the major arguments for and against a particular proposal. If I am correct, the planning board does not feel obligated to provide data in the written materials leading up to town meeting to support what it claims to be the beneficial outcomes from a rezoning, even when the rezoning is very controversial. Nor does the planning board feel obligated to disclose any significant risks that might interfere with the desired outcomes. I believe these standards conflict with the standards the League advocates and are not in the best interest of the town. Let's turn to Article 25 as an example. The planning board, in advocating not only form-based zoning, but also considerable changes in the density and potential uses of property in North Amherst, did not cite a single study that would support any of the favorable outcomes the board anticipated from the rezoning. If it did not have any study in mind, it should at least disclose that fact and explain why major rezoning should proceed nonetheless. I would not propose that, but at least you need to explain why you would proceed without any of those studies. Nor did it cite a single example of a college town or other town in which somewhat similar changes were adopted successfully. If no such example exists, it should disclose that fact with an appropriate explanation. Moreover, the planning board was fully aware of the advice provided by town managers, town planners, and others in Hanover and Storrs with respect to the proposed development of large undergraduate housing for Gateway. Many representatives from Amherst, including a member of the select board, the town manager, the director of the planning department, and others, spent the entire day visiting Hanover and another day visiting Storrs, both college towns that had gathered reams of useful information in connection with their planning. And the advice our representatives heard was unanimous. If you want a successful, vibrant, mixed-use development involving housing, commercial, and office use, you must do all you can to limit the presence of undergraduate students. Yet there was not a single mention of this advice in the material provided for a town meeting. Of course, the planning board might have distinguished North Amherst from Gateway, or expressly rejected the advice from Hanover and Storrs. Surely, however, when the director of our planning department has concluded regarding Gateway that significant concentrations of underage undergraduates, quote, would threaten the viability of the rest of the mixed-use project, town meeting members should expect, at a minimum, some acknowledgement that A, the lessons of Hanover and Storrs posed a challenge to the possible large housing developments proposed for North Amherst, and B, why we should proceed with the rezoning nevertheless. So I'm suggesting that you think carefully in the future about what the concept of, quote, full and fair disclosure means. It's one thing to believe in your proposal, and surely we all expect that. But town meeting deserves to know the strengths and weaknesses of each major rezoning project, particularly when, as typically occurs, the vote of the planning board is unanimous without a single dissenting report. And such material should be received sufficiently in advance of town meeting so that members may digest and critique them. Finally, I believe that proceeding this way, you will promote greater trust in the sensitivity of the planning board to the diverse interests of the citizens of Amherst. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Yes, sir.
Phil Goslin, Precinct 1. I live on Summer Street. And I actually just wanted to go right after John. I didn't mention this to him, but even though I've lived in Amherst for 25 years, I grew up in Storrs. And it's an unbelievable development they've done there. They've created kind of a canyon in the middle of the town, and I know that the residents are kind of appalled. And I saw this Mansfield Independent News, this is a small town paper, editorial. I just wanted to read this for a minute. Is it too late to take back this town? With the Stores Center's mixed-use development rising out of the ground in the form of thinly disguised student housing, local residents face a new reality: traffic, crime, urban blight, and a string of empty promises. Lulled by talk of a vibrant Stores downtown, generous tax revenues and jobs, even the staunchest of downtown supporters admit it was a mistake to place the town in the hand of outside investors and the university. This development lumbered down the tracks for 10 years, sidestepping any referendum of resident approval. Facing diminishing state revenues, the town council believed the Stores development would provide an immediate source of tax revenue. Instead, town staffing obligation to police and overseeing the project increased dramatically. Obviously, there are some slight differences, but I think that's something to keep in mind. So I just also wanted to quickly mention, I know we're running out of time here, the North Amherst residents that have caucused and gotten together basically are agreeing with what the citizens have said so far this evening, very strongly. And we certainly hope that you change the priorities in which order you go. If you bring back this rezoning, which we certainly hope you don't, there are a couple of things just from the North Amherst point of view we want to put in. One is the Montague Road north of the river and the North Pleasant Street also that are currently zoned RN should not be changed. There should be no carve-outs, there should be no exemptions, there should be no earmarks for developers whatsoever. There should be no new roads coming into Montague Road. And this hasn't been mentioned in any of the projects, but there should be no taking of the corner of Summer Street to create a traffic light there and a through street. I know the Department of Public Works is keen on that. So this is very important. Also, having to do with the coverage, the lot coverage. Originally commercial, and I guess still it's 70% lot coverage is possible. And there was a proposal to gun it up to 85%. That was, of course, turned down. And now, you'd think after the proposal was turned down twice that people would think about lesser lot coverage, maybe 40%, 50%. But actually now we're hearing that developers want to come back with another proposal increasing the lot coverage from 70%. This is totally unacceptable, and we want to sort of nip that right in the bud. So the only thing that hasn't been mentioned by other people that I just want to put in is the consideration of a possibility of a local historic district in North Amherst. Otherwise, I'm very pleased with what all of their various neighbors and citizens have said, and I hope you'll take it and give it full consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosselin. Ms. Fitch.
Laura Fitch, Pulpit Hill Road, North Amherst. I will probably be the only voice supporting the zoning tonight, so I'll try to handle it well. But I think the thing I had the most trouble, everything I heard today I mostly agreed with, particularly around the rental registration, and I really appreciated the work that Mr. Kallstrom did, the data that he got, and I hope that there might even be like something around increased fines with increased incidents with nuisance properties. So I wholeheartedly agree with everyone there. But one of the things I had the most trouble hearing today was Vince O'Connor saying that Meadow Street and Route 63 have bike paths. I'm probably the only one who bicycled here tonight. So, you did too? So I bicycled on Route 63. I bicycle on it almost every day. There's absolutely no bike path there. And there's absolutely no bike path on Meadow Street. Yes, they repaved Meadow Street, and maybe they moved the white lines in a little bit, but there's no bike path there. And I don't like that type of misrepresentation. It makes me wonder what else is being misrepresented.
Mr. O'Connor, Mr. O'Connor, Mr. O'Connor, Mr. O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor, please be quiet. Mr. O'Connor, please be quiet. Ms. Fitch, I'm not going to turn this into a shouting match. We need to be civil to one another. Ms. Fitch, I have yet to be able to complete a sentence because you're talking over me. Ms. Fitch, I think that your statement about Mr. O'Connor was out of order, and I'll ask you to.
I'm sorry. I was talking about bike paths. And
you were until
okay.
your last statement, and I did not think that was appropriate. And
okay.
Mr. O'Connor, I was about to reprimand her for that when you started shouting at me. So please, let's let the person who has the microphone use it. Thank you.
Okay, so then regarding the random survey which somebody brought forward today, I just thought it was interesting because all the stuff that was listed as a lot of stuff under desirable ratings says things like small affordable houses on small lots, cluster of homes on smaller lots, support construction of smaller homes on small lots instead of large homes. And so much of this says to me pocket neighborhoods and co-housing and that sort of thing. And sort of the type of thing that I showed in a response to the rezoning on the Puffer property. So I don't think, I mean, co-housing happened in North Amherst because we had PURD zoning, not because we had RN zoning. I mean, I just came from the National Co-Housing Conference in California. I was just there this week. Every group that wants to form around the U.S. is having trouble finding sites that have the right zoning. And, you know, I think, you know, we don't zone for pocket neighborhoods and small houses on small lots. And it's considered desirable. And what's considered most undesirable is the luxury homes. And we have lots of zoning that supports that. So I think this is the right place for it. Regarding the suggestion that COM is good enough as it is, I don't believe it's really economically feasible. Otherwise, it already would be done. If you look at the one of the buildings that I worked on in Pomeroy Commons had all commercial below, residential above, and it was built right kind of on the street at Pomeroy Commons with the parking behind. So it was the closest thing to sort of form-based zone that we have in the town for, you know, one of the few examples that would meet form-based zone. And but it sat empty on the ground floor for, I think, over a year. I'm not really sure. And the housing above, which is right on a bus line, sold as condominiums very quickly, I believe. But the commercial underneath sat empty. So I don't think requiring 100% commercial on the ground floor, which is what COM requires, makes sense. And I guess that's it. And one other thing that's listed under most desirable is agriculture-based businesses. And I did want to point out that in the process of the form-based zoning and the rezoning article piece of it, our agricultural processing was added based on the feedback of the people in this room. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Fitch. Yes, ma'am.
Judy Seacrest, 285 Lincoln Avenue. And I just have one sentence. Please consider the access roads going into any increased density beyond the little circle, because the impact may be extreme. So if you just consider the access roads beyond.
Thank you very much, and thank you for distilling your argument into one sentence as well. we could all learn from that, I'm sure. Yes, ma'am. You can use more than one sentence if you'd like.
I think I have to. My name is Janet McGowan. I live at 706 Southeast Street in Amherst. I think I'm precinct 8 in my first year in town meeting. I was on this committee, which I don't remember the name of, during the master planning process. I think it was called LURG or something, the land use. It was like it was supposed to be an overarching kind of coordinating committee with all the different committees that were working. We only met like 4 times. We talked about TDR. We talked about form-based zoning. We talked about reducing density in exchange for increasing it somewhere else. We talked about taxing non-owner occupied properties higher, which many cities and towns do because of the higher costs, as we can tell by our new regulatory framework. It never finished that work, and I guess I feel philosophical in a town that's over 250 years old that we have time to look at these ideas, and you know, too bad that we didn't get that done. This is my first time in front of this committee, and I'm kind of wondering like what the goals are. Like, what goals are you trying to achieve in the next year? I was going to add a goal, like many people, which is finding a way to effectively work with neighborhoods and get them on board supporting zoning changes. See if you can develop a process for making that happen. I was sort of taken aback at my precinct meeting that almost no one understood. I think I can't remember the article, if it was 24 or 25, that this was 10 years in the making, but no one really knew what it was about and had lots of questions. There are other communities that have that kind of process. Larry Susskind at the Consensus Building Institute with MIT works with neighborhoods very often and towns on how to do environmental siting issues without all the screaming. And I think that might be a good place to go to look. There are local facilitators that work with communities pretty effectively. And I think the benefits of that process would be sort of less anger and upsetness, less of a sense of zoning being pressed on neighborhoods, less contention later when individual permitting procedures happen. Also, I think you're going to get better ideas in your article. I mean, I think, contentious groups are annoying, but at the same time, you get better ideas out of them. And the articles will make changes that reflect the needs and the wants of the community, not kind of ideas that people have that seem like good ones at the time, which can fail or do well, I'm not quite sure. I also think people need time to discuss these things and take it in. They need information. As a town meeting member, I felt like I didn't have much time. In a really hectic time of my year, I had a stack of papers coming at me 2 weeks early, and I really did try to digest them, and then I sort of succumbed to my own part-time work and the needs of my children and their 4 different sports teams, as well as town meeting itself. And so that became, I didn't have time to really dig into it, and I was really trying to. I feel like the neighborhoods didn't really, especially in South Amherst, people didn't even understand what was happening. And so I'm just sort of making a plea for a goal of developing a good community process that, when you go into town meeting, you have the support of the neighborhoods. And, wouldn't that be a great change to have that presented to town meeting? I think you get what you want, which is have a zoning article passed and a rezoning that helps the neighborhood and strengthens the community bonds in it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGowan, for the suggestions. Yes, ma'am.
Gretchen Fox. I live on Fearing Street, a member of town meeting from Precinct 10 as well. I'm going to cut to the chase and read the last paragraph of what I prepared, which is about Gateway. I'm urging you not to bring Gateway up again because of lack of data the last time around, and I hope the same mistakes aren't made in other planning priorities that do come up. I think following Ms. McGowan, I hope that you do plenty of studies before you do bring up these rezoning articles again. And in addition to the studies or surveys, we're asking you to give thorough consideration to the neighborhoods and the residents, in the case of Gateway, that are north and west of downtown and adjacent to Gateway. On Lincoln Avenue and on the streets surrounding Fearing Street, the erosion of family housing is alarming to us. And it must concern anyone who's worried about sustaining the character of this large and vital part of Amherst, or worried about sustainability in Amherst, as collectively, we in that huge neighborhood own fewer cars, easily walk downtown, and to both the university and to Amherst College, locations where many of us work. So we hope to work with you to identify and promote our common goals, and to address fairly the issues that divide us. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Several people have mentioned Gateway, and so I just want to point out for people that have concerns about Gateway and for what the process would be around that Gateway rezoning is not even on our roadmap at this point. Town meeting this past spring appropriated funds for a zoning study for Gateway in the downtown area. That study has not taken place yet, and certainly that would be among the studies that would need to take place, as Ms. Fox just asked us to make sure that we do. So before any zoning proposal comes forward, and there has been no zoning proposal for Gateway yet, a great deal of work has to be done. As I said, it's not even on our roadmap at this point. So for folks who might be concerned that this is around the corner or something that's going to happen this fall or even next spring, Gateway is a long way away from a zoning perspective.
It's on new issues, priority A.
Yeah, if I'm,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize for misrepresenting that. My point remains that before any rezoning in Gateway takes place, that this study needs to take place, the one that we just appropriated the money for, and that is not imminent at this point. It's certainly not a fall issue, and it would remain to be seen whether it was a spring issue. Sure, go ahead. Sure, thank you. You know, it's a balancing act that we have to perform. We have a limited amount of money, and studies are not universally supported. And so there are always people that have concerns when we start spending a lot of time and effort and money studying things. So it's, you know, it's a balance we have to try to find. Sure, since I responded to you, go ahead.
Professor Carlstrom, who is doing an absolutely incredible job that doesn't cost the town anything. I think there are probably other people at the university who might be able to do some studies that wouldn't cost much.
Thank you. Thank you. I see your hand, Ms. McGowan. We're running short on time, so I just want sure. I just want to scan the room for other hands for people who might not have spoken yet, just to make sure anybody who wants to talk has the opportunity. I'm not seeing anybody, so go ahead, Ms. McGowan. Please do come up and use the mic, because they can't hear you on Amherst Media unless you do. Thank you.
I have a question, just because I feel sort of slightly bad in not having prepared formal remarks. Will you be taking other comments after this? People's ideas or written comments?
Not tonight. So this meeting is sort of going to end when everybody has said their piece. But going forward, all our meetings are open to the public, and they're typically pretty collaborative. So we take public input all the time.
So we could just send comments in later.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and we very much encourage people to send comments in written form. But everybody's welcome at our meetings all the time. They're always open to the public. Thank you. Mr. Tucker.
Any comment that you want the subcommittee to consider at a specific meeting, if you send it to the planning department, we will copy it, send it on to the subcommittee members, and make it available at the meeting. If you could try and do that the week before the meeting itself, it would be easier for us, but we will make every effort to do that.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any more hands, so I will thank you all for attending, and the folks that are watching on TV for watching, and thank you all for your feedback. In terms of next steps from here, what we're going to do is at our next meeting of this body and the planning board, we will have a discussion of what our priorities should be, taking into consideration everything that we've heard tonight, and start to put together a more concrete plan for what we intend to do this fall and after that. So thank you very much for coming. And did you have a question, Ms. Burgess?
Are you going to be presenting stuff to the planning board tonight, or is that
No, a future meeting.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you. Mr. Tucker, did you have anything else?
Just to ask that, in fact, you set a next set of meetings. The next planning board meeting is July 18th. And a logical 2-week increment, which is what you have done in the past, would be August 1st, 15th, and 29th.
Chris?
Actually, the next planning board meeting is next week.
Oh, that's right, the 27th. Did you want to hold a meeting next week? Do you want to hold a meeting next week?
And the next after that is July 18th, is that right? Next planning
One
board?
after that is the July 18th.
Can I ask folks to take their conversations in the hallway if you need to talk and discuss further? Thanks. Sorry, did you have your hand up? Rob.
I feel like July 18th is a long way away, so I'd like to meet before then, whether it's next week or July 11th or something, you know, I don't know. Also, I had some things that I wanted to say about the work plan.
Okay.
So one thing that wasn't specifically mentioned today was the memo that we got from Cinda Jones. I think that something like that directed density TDR thing is something that I would like to work for. Second, I would like to anticipate that there will be state level zoning reform and eventual partnership community opportunities under CLRPA and the Valley Vision, and that we should begin working on the specific zoning pieces where we're not quite in compliance, such as low impact development requirements. So that's something that we should put on the work plan, whether it's, you know, fall or some point in the future. It's not something that we should just forget about. Also, I'd like to pare down the work plan so that it fits on one sheet of paper. And I noticed that the work plan under way down at the bottom of priority B, village center zoning, Pomeroy Village and East Amherst have disappeared. And actually those are much higher priority for me than the ones that are actually listed. Granted, those are years away, but
Okay.
So I also support the idea of paring it down. Probably not something that we can or should do tonight,
Yeah.
but yeah, we could weed out some of the stuff that is not actively actionable.
If you want, staff could go through the list, and while we wouldn't remove things entire, what we'd do is line out suggested things to let go of, and see if there isn't a way to pare it in that fashion.
Sure, and then schedule it as a discussion item for
Right.
an upcoming meeting. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, sorry, on scheduling, Rob, you had said that you wanted to do something before the 18th, I believe.
yes, I'm free next week, and I wouldn't mind starting our discussion next week. But you know, if that's too early or too late notice for the rest of you, maybe sometime before July 18th, because that just seems like a long time.
Yes, it does, and there's a lot to be done, and the time proceeds quickly.
Yeah.
Next week, I think, would be a problem for me, and beyond that, I'm going to turn into a pumpkin, so it's really more of a question for you two than it is for me.
Do you want to say July the 11th?
Sure.
That'd be good.
Done.
Very good. Okay. We have nothing else on our agenda, I believe, so we are adjourned at 6:46. Thank you all.